You don't touch this table. Not now. Not ever, do you understand me? Bradley Sutter's voice cracked across the 38th floor of the Kestrel Harbor Tower like a whip against glass. Naomi Sinclair stood 3 feet from the head of the conference table, a chestnut leather portfolio pressed flat against her ribs, and said nothing at all. Behind her, Whitney Poole let out a short, ugly laugh that she tried, badly, to swallow. Trevor Lang stared very hard at his laptop screen. Somewhere down the hall, a copier hummed, indifferent to the small war unfolding in conference room 38B. Sutter pointed a finger at her chest, close enough that she could smell the burnt coffee on his breath. Security is 2 floors down. I will have you removed in handcuffs, and I will enjoy every second of it. Do you hear me, little girl? Naomi did not raise her voice. She never did. Sir, she said, I was told to be in this room at 9 o'clock. Told by who? The mailroom? Sutter turned to the table, arms spread wide, playing to an audience that was too afraid to laugh out loud. Ladies and gentlemen, apparently we now let anyone off Tryon Street wander into executive strategy meetings. 14 minutes later, Bradley Sutter would understand exactly how wrong he had been. But to understand how a 29-year-old woman ended up standing at that table with a fountain pen in her blazer pocket and absolutely nothing. To fear, you have to go back 6 hours, to a house on Selwyn Avenue where the porch light was still on and the coffee hadn't finished brewing. The house was modest by Charlotte standards, a 1-story brick rental with a chain-link fence and a magnolia tree that dropped white petals across the front steps every April. Naomi laced her running shoes in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the stove clock, glowing 5:42 in pale green digits. On the counter sat a single photograph in a cheap dollar store frame, a much younger Naomi in a Wharton graduation gown, standing beside a silver-haired white man with tired, kind eyes. Walter Reginald Kessler, her mentor, the only father she had ever really known. She put in her earbuds, no music, just the dry, clipped voice of an earnings call from 4 days earlier, the kind of audio most people found unbearable before sunrise. To Naomi, it was a lullaby and an alarm clock both at once. She ran 6 miles through a neighborhood that hadn't fully decided whether it belonged to Old Charlotte or New Charlotte, past shuttered diners and glass condo towers still wearing scaffolding. And the whole time, some part of her brain kept turning over numbers, debt covenants, regulatory filings, the precise legal architecture of a company she was, in every meaningful sense, about to inherit. 17 years earlier, Naomi Sinclair had been an 11-year-old girl curled into the corner of the Cosset Branch Library in Memphis, Tennessee, with a library card held together by packing tape and a paperback copy of a book on value investing that was far too old for her reading level and far too interesting to put down. Her mother, Dolores, worked double shifts in the surgical ICU at a downtown hospital. Her father had left before she could remember his face. The library was warm, and the librarian never asked why a child was there alone until closing. That was where Walter Kessler found her. He was visiting Memphis for a Literacy Foundation Board meeting, the semi-retired younger brother of the man who had founded Kestrel Harbor Financial Group 30 years before. He sat down across the little table from her and asked what page she was on. She told him without looking up. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Over the following 17 years, Walter didn't just mentor Naomi. He built her, brick by careful brick. He funded her education through a private trust that never once had her name attached to his in any public filing. He brought her to shareholder meetings and had her sit in the back, silent, absorbing everything. He taught her to read a 10K, filing the way other people read poetry, to find the lie buried inside a polished pitch deck, to walk into a room full of men twice her age and never once let them see her hands shake. He made her spend 1 summer shadowing the compliance department, another shadowing outside counsel, another on the trading floor answering phones. By 26, she understood Kestrel Harbor's balance sheet better than half its board of directors. 11 months ago, Walter Kessler died of pancreatic cancer in a hospice room overlooking Lake Norman. Before he went, he handed his older brother, company chairman Edmund Kessler, a leather folder 2 inches thick. Inside were 17 years of performance reviews, deal memos, and legal opinions, every one of them produced under his quiet direction. On the cover, in Walter's shaking handwriting, were 11 words: "She is ready. Do not let comfort or bias delay what this company needs." The board voted 3 nights ago. The vote was unanimous. Nobody on that call had told Bradley Sutter. Naomi turned the last corner toward home, breath rising in pale clouds against the cool October morning. Today was the day the announcement would become official. At 10 o'clock sharp, in front of the full board. The 9 o'clock operations meeting was supposed to be nothing more than quiet observation. She showered, ate half a grapefruit standing at the sink, and pulled on a navy blazer that had cost less than the coffee cart downstairs, charged for a week of lattes. Flat shoes, small gold studs, no makeup beyond a little mascara. She wanted to walk into that building as a human being first, and a title second, if a title ever came up at all. By 8:40, she was standing at the base of the Kestrel Harbor Tower on South Tryon Street, 60 stories of blue glass curtain wall catching the low morning sun. The lobby smelled of espresso and floor wax. Isaiah Boyd stood behind the security desk, 55 years old, gray at the temples, a clipboard in one hand, and a quiet, unhurried dignity in everything he did. He had watched Naomi visit Walter Kessler in this building for the better part of a decade. "Morning, Miss Sinclair," he said, scanning her badge. "Morning, Isaiah." He looked at her a beat longer than usual. "Whatever you're headed up there for today," he said, "you walk in like the place already belongs to you. Because one day it just might." She smiled and thanked him. He had no idea how close to the truth he'd landed. Neither did anyone else in that lobby. The elevator rose 40 floors in near silence. The air on the executive level was noticeably colder, the carpet thicker underfoot, the kind of quiet that costs money to manufacture. The mahogany doors of conference room 38B swung open, and Bradley Sutter looked up mid-sentence, annoyance already forming on his face, before he had even decided what he was annoyed about. "Wrong floor, sweetheart," he said. "This is a strategy session, not a job fair." "I was told to sit in on this meeting," Naomi said, walking calmly toward the table. "Told by who? Did you get lost coming up from the mailroom?" Trevor Lang and Whitney Poole exchanged a look and laughed, quiet and complicit. Colleen Marsh, the HR director, adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat and leaned forward with a voice dripping in false sweetness. "Honey, did you check in downstairs? You'll need a visitor badge, sweetheart." Naomi lifted the badge, already clipped to her lapel. "I have one." Sutter snatched it off her jacket, so fast the clip pinched her skin. He held it up to the light like it might be counterfeit currency. "Naomi Sinclair," he read aloud, mocking each syllable. "Never heard of you. Who let you in?" "Chairman Kessler." The room went still for a heartbeat. Then Sutter laughed, one loud theatrical bark that made Trevor flinch in his chair. "The chairman, sweetheart. Edmund hasn't set foot on this floor in a month. He's 78. Half the time he can't remember where he parked." Colleen joined in, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that carried anyway. "I think there's been a mix-up. Let me walk you back down to the lobby, so we can sort out where you're actually supposed to be." "The meeting starts in 3 minutes, Naomi said. "I'll wait here." Sutter's smile curdled at the edges. He stepped closer, close enough that she could count the broken capillaries blooming across his cheeks. "Listen, kid. I don't know what box someone checked to get you up here, but this is the executive floor. We move 8-figure deals before lunch. We don't have time for a diversity photo op." Trevor and Whitney went very quiet, very interested in their screens. Nobody said a word in her defense. Naomi's breathing stayed even, her hands stayed at her sides. "What are you, 23?" Sutter went on, turning to play to the table now, spreading his arms like a man delivering a punchline he'd rehearsed his whole life. "Ladies and gentlemen, apparently is personally recruiting out of sorority houses these days." A thin ripple of nervous laughter went around the table. Colleen giggled into her coffee cup. Naomi didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give him a single thing to work with. She pulled out a chair, 3 seats down from the head of the table, and sat, setting her leather portfolio down and folding her hands over it. "Did I say you could sit there?" Sutter's voice had gone sharp now, the performance curdling into something more personal. "I heard you," Naomi said. "I'm not moving." He circled the table slowly, one finger trailing along the polished mahogany, the way a man circles something he intends to hurt. "You know your problem. People like you show up thinking a scholarship and a discount rack blazer makes you one of us. It doesn't. You can memorize every buzzword in the book, but you will never sit at this table. Not really. Not the way I do." Nobody at that table looked up. Nathaniel Cross, the CFO, kept his eyes fixed on his laptop like it might save him. Naomi turned her head slowly and met Sutter's eyes without flinching. "Are you finished?" she asked. "Because I'd like to take notes." She opened her portfolio. Inside sat a slim silver fountain pen, engraved along the barrel with 3 small initials, WRK. Sutter couldn't see the engraving from where he stood, but something about the weight of it in her hand, the way she uncapped it without looking down, made him pause for exactly 1 second too long. She wrote across the top of a blank page, 902 Bradley Sutter, EVP Operations. Then she looked up, pen poised. "Please continue. You were explaining who's allowed at this table." The silence that followed had a different texture, colder, heavier, the kind that makes furniture creak just from the pressure of it. Sutter's face went from pink to a deep, dangerous red. "Put that away, no thank you." I said, "Put it away." At that exact moment, a side door opened without a sound, and Eleanor Whitcomb slipped into the room. 74 years old, spine like a rifle barrel, charcoal suit, a strand of gray pearls at her throat. She was one of 3 board members who had cast their vote 3 nights earlier. She said nothing, took a seat at the far end of the room, opened her phone, and pressed record. Nobody noticed her. Sutter was too focused on Naomi. Colleen was too focused on Sutter. The meeting, officially, began. Nathaniel Cross cleared his throat and began presenting an acquisition proposal, a $780 million deal to absorb Rutledge Freight Systems, a mid-cap logistics operator out of Ohio. Slides bloomed on the screen behind him, revenue projections, tax synergies, integration timelines. Naomi listened for 4 full minutes before she spoke, quietly, professionally. "Mr. Cross, I'm sorry to interrupt. The tax structure on slide 4 looks suboptimal." The room turned, Cross blinked. "Excuse me? If you file this under a Section 338 H10 election, instead of the current structure, you preserve the stepped-up basis and save the company somewhere between 31 and 36 million in deferred tax liability." Cross opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his own slide. Sutter slammed his palm flat against the table, rattling 3 coffee cups. "Nobody asked you. I'm offering an observation that would save the company real money. I said be quiet and sit there." Cross hesitated, glanced at Naomi, glanced at his slide, and swallowed whatever he'd been about to say. "Of course, Bradley. Moving on to Section 3. Naomi looked down at her notebook and wrote a single word beside the timestamp. Ignored. Sutter, emboldened by the silence of the room, leaned down until his mouth was inches from her ear. "Let me be very clear," he said. "In this room, you are invisible. You have no voice. And when I find out whose mistake let you up here, they are going to be looking for a new job right alongside you. So sit there, keep your mouth shut, and When this meeting ends, you are going to walk out of this building and never set foot on this floor again. Are we clear, little girl?" Naomi didn't answer him out loud. She wrote instead. 907, threatened termination of unnamed employee. Told me I have no voice. Sutter saw her writing, and something in his jaw tightened past the point of casual cruelty into something closer to panic dressed up as rage. He turned to Colleen. "HR, I want her escorted out of this building before lunch. I'll coordinate with building security, personally," Colleen said, already reaching for her phone, eager in a way that made the whole room feel smaller and colder at once. For the next 20 minutes, every time Naomi opened her mouth to flag a flaw in the due diligence timeline or a gap in the regulatory filing, Sutter talked over her, louder each time, until she stopped trying and simply wrote everything down instead. Colleen rolled her eyes. Cross avoided her gaze entirely. She had become a ghost in a room full of people who believed they owned the air. Every insult, every slammed palm, every dismissal was being caught on the boardroom's ceiling-mounted cameras, on the compliance microphone array built into the table itself, and on Eleanor Whitcomb's phone, resting face-up and forgotten at the far end of the table. Bradley Sutter had no idea he was building his own coffin, one sentence at a time. 30 minutes in, Sutter pushed back his chair and walked to the credenza to pour a fresh cup of coffee. He set the cup down, turned back to the stack of manila folders on his side of the table, and his face changed completely. "Where's my memo?" Colleen glanced up. "Which one?" "Bradley. The acquisition memo. Confidential." It was right here before his eyes slid across the table to Naomi. Before she sat down, the room went very quiet. Sutter's voice climbed. 60 pages. Market sensitive. Federally regulated information, and it was on this table 10 minutes ago. He began throwing folders across the surface, papers scattering. Coffee over the rim of someone's cup. A performance for an audience that was too frightened to look away. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Naomi. "You, open your bag, right now." "I haven't touched anything on this table," Naomi said, setting her pen down without hurrying. "I didn't ask what you touched. I asked you to open the bag." "I'm not going to do that." Sutter's eyes lit up, the way a man's eyes light up when he believes he has finally won. He raised his voice loud enough to carry through the glass wall to the open floor beyond it. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all as witnesses. A stranger who talked her way onto this floor has stolen 60 pages of confidential acquisition material. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a federal crime." Naomi's heart beat faster. Her face did not move at all. Colleen rose from her chair, straightened her blazer, and approached with the slow, practiced concern of someone who had spent 2 decades quietly burying complaints in a filing cabinet. "Sweetheart, if you have nothing to hide, just open the bag. It's the fastest way to clear this up. Otherwise, we call the police." "You don't have the authority to search me," Naomi said, "and neither does he." Sutter was already dialing the desk phone. "Security, executive floor, now." Somewhere down on the 19th floor, a radio crackled to life. Naomi's eyes moved, not in panic, but in calculation. She knew this building's blueprints, the way most people know their own kitchens, not because she had planned for this exact morning, but because Walter had insisted years earlier that anyone who intended to run a company should understand every camera, every microphone, every legal obligation baked into its walls. 2 ceiling cameras covered this room, one in the northeast corner and one behind the recessed lighting above the credenza, installed after an insider trading scare 6 years back. If she stayed exactly where she was, she sat in the blind spot between them. So she stood slowly and shifted 2 steps to her left, resting one hand lightly on the back of her chair, turning just enough to face Sutter head-on. Now both cameras had her clearly. Now the overhead microphone array sat directly above her voice. She made it look like nothing more than standing up to speak. You walked in here uninvited, Sutter was saying, gesturing wildly now, performing for an audience of frozen faces. You sat where you weren't told to sit, and now 60 pages of confidential material are missing. Do you think we're stupid?
Naomi.
Mr. Sutter, Naomi said, her voice level and clear, pitched without appearing to be pitched at all. I would like the record to reflect that I have not touched, approached, or handled any document on this table. I would also like the record to reflect that you have just accused me, in front of 7 witnesses, of a federal crime, without a shred of evidence. Sutter laughed, high and brittle. The record? Honey, there is no record. This is my meeting, my room, my rules. At the far end of the table, Eleanor Whitcomb smiled to herself and quietly adjusted the angle of her phone. The door opened, and 2 security officers stepped in. Isaiah Boyd and a younger white officer named Cole Bennett. Isaiah's expression did not change when he saw Naomi, but something in his eyes flickered. Gentlemen, Sutter said, this woman has stolen company property. Search her bag, detain her, call the police. Sir, Isaiah said carefully, we can't search a guest without written authorization from General Counsel or a warrant. I am giving you the authorization right now. Sir, respectfully, you don't have that authority. Only legal or law enforcement can approve a personal search on company property. I helped write that section of the security handbook myself 4 years ago. Excuse me? Sutter's face went crimson. He turned on Isaiah with something close to fury. You think because you two happen to look alike you get to protect each other? You're fired. Pack your locker. Isaiah didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't so much as shift his weight. Sir, you don't have the authority to terminate security staff. That's HR and the chairman, and only the chairman, in a case like this. You what? Sutter spun toward Colleen. Fire him. Right now in writing. Colleen hesitated for the first time all morning. Bradley, there are procedures. Fire him. The room's temperature seemed to drop by 5 degrees all at once. Naomi took one small, precise step, just enough to stay perfectly framed by both cameras, and opened her notebook to a fresh page, speaking aloud as she wrote, 9:22. Mr. Sutter orders the termination of a black security officer for refusing to conduct an illegal search. Witnesses present, Ms. Marsh, Mr. Cross, Mr. Lang, Miss Poole, Officer Bennett. Sutter lunged and swiped at the notebook. Give me that. Naomi pulled it back against her chest, and his hand swiped through empty air. You will not touch my property, she said, her voice not rising even a fraction, only sharpening at the edges like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. Sutter was breathing hard now, his tie crooked, sweat beating at his hairline. You think a notebook is going to save you. Nobody in this city believes a girl with a pen over 23 years of my word. When the police get here, they're going to see exactly what I see. A liar, a thief, a fraud. He stepped in close enough that she could see the veins standing out along his temple. I have run this floor for 23 years, he said. I know every judge, every commissioner, every prosecutor worth knowing in this state. By the time I'm finished, you won't just lose whatever job you think you have. You'll lose your credit, your name, your future. You'll be lucky to find work scrubbing floors in Gastonia. Naomi didn't answer. She wrote, steady and unhurried. Sutter turned back to Isaiah. Grab her. Hold her here until police arrive. Isaiah looked at Cole. Cole looked at the carpet. Neither man moved. I said grab her. Sir, Isaiah finally said, his voice quiet but immovable as bedrock. I'm not putting my hands on this woman. Not today. Not ever. And respectfully, neither should you. Sutter looked like he'd been slapped across the face. He spun back to the desk phone and started dialing with shaking fingers. Fine. I'll call the police myself, and when they get here, you're going to learn exactly how the real world works, little girl. Naomi closed her notebook. She turned her body 1/4 of a degree. Nothing anyone would consciously register, and looked directly into the northeast camera. Mr. Sutter, she said.
What?
I'd suggest you put the phone down and sit back in your chair. Why on earth would I do that? Because in roughly 90 seconds, you are going to wish, more than you have ever wished for anything in your life, that you had. Sutter laughed in her face.
Or what?
The elevator chimed somewhere down the corridor. The mahogany doors of conference room 38B swung open, and Chairman Edmund Kessler walked in first, 78 years old, thin but upright, leaning lightly on a polished cherrywood cane, his white hair combed back. His navy suit fitted like it had been sewn onto him that same morning. Behind him came 4 members of the board, General Counsel Patricia Vance, in a tailored charcoal suit, and Eleanor Whitcomb, who had slipped quietly out from the back of the room to join them at the door, phone still in hand. The room rose, not out of respect, out of pure reflex. Chairs scraped against hardwood. A coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Bradley Sutter fumbled to straighten his tie, his face draining from crimson to a sickly gray beneath the flush. He set the phone receiver down mid-dial. Edmund.
Chairman.
Perfect timing, actually. I was just dealing with a situation. A young woman walked in claiming she'd been invited by you. Edmund Kessler did not look at him. He walked past Sutter, past Colleen, past every executive in the room, and stopped directly in front of Naomi's chair. His eyes were warm in a way that made the whole room feel briefly, impossibly out of place.
Naomi,
he said. I apologize for the delay. Tryon Street was a parking lot this morning. Naomi stood and took his outstretched hand. Good morning, Chairman Kessler. Not chairman anymore, dear. Just Edmund. We're colleagues now. The sound that came out of Bradley Sutter's throat was not quite a word. It was something smaller, something closer to the noise a man makes when the floor disappears beneath him. Trevor Lang's laptop sights closed on its own, because his hands had gone limp in his lap. Whitney Poole pressed her fingers over her mouth. Colleen Marsh's pearls trembled visibly against her collarbone. Edmund turned to face the full room, cleared his throat once, and his voice, when it came, carried without any effort at all. Before we move to today's agenda, there is one matter that takes precedence over everything else this company does. He nodded to Patricia Vance. She stepped forward, opened a leather folder, and began to read. Pursuant to a unanimous vote of the Board of Directors of Kestrel Harbor Financial Group, taken in executive session 3 evenings ago, it is my honor to formally announce that, effective immediately, Ms. Naomi Sinclair is appointed Chief Executive Officer of this company. The air went out of the room like a held breath finally released. Patricia kept reading. Miss Sinclair holds a Juris Doctor from Georgetown and an MBA from the Wharton School. She most recently served as a managing director in distressed assets at a major private equity firm, overseeing a portfolio in excess of $11 billion. She was personally trained over 17 years by our late co-founder, Walter Reginald Kessler, who designated her as his recommended successor in a letter entered into the board record 8 months ago. Silence. Then, at the back of the room, Eleanor Whitcomb began to clap, slow and deliberate, the sound of a woman who had waited a very long time for exactly this moment. One by one, the other board members joined her. Patricia joined. Edmund joined last, and let the applause carry for exactly as long as it needed to. Sutter did not clap. He looked like a man about to be physically sick. Colleen made one small, strangled sound, somewhere between an apology and a sob, and sat down before her legs gave out beneath her. When the applause finally died, Edmund turned slowly, deliberately, to Sutter. Mr. Sutter, I understand you've already had the pleasure of meeting our new chief executive. Edmund, Sutter's voice cracked down the middle. Sir, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't know. Nobody told me. If I had known. Naomi cut him off without raising her voice by so much as a decibel. Mr. Sutter, my badge, please. Sutter's fingers fumbled at his jacket pocket, no longer working properly, and he pulled the badge out and held it toward her with a hand that would not stop shaking. She took it, clipped it back onto her lapel, and Patricia Vance stepped forward with a second badge. Matte black, heavier, gold lettering catching the light. Naomi Sinclair, Chief Executive Officer. She clipped it on beside the first. Sutter staggered half a step back and caught the edge of the table to keep from going down entirely. Miss Sinclair, you said I didn't know how to read a balance sheet. You said I didn't have the right to speak in this room. It was a misunderstanding, I thought. You said you would have me removed in handcuffs, Naomi said, like a thief. His mouth opened and closed twice, and nothing came out either time. Naomi opened her notebook and began to read aloud, calmly, page by page, every timestamp, every phrase, every threat. The boardroom was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming somewhere above the ceiling tiles. When she finished, she closed the notebook and set it flat on the table. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Sutter, she said. This was a demonstration. A very thorough demonstration of exactly who you are when you believe no one important is watching. She glanced up at the ceiling cameras, then across at Eleanor Whitcomb's phone, still resting face up on the table. Fortunately for this company, someone important is always watching. Bradley Sutter sat down. Not because he chose to, because his legs finally stopped obeying him. Naomi walked to the head of the table, the seat Sutter had occupied for 23 years, and rested her hand on the back of the chair, without sitting yet, letting the room absorb the weight of it. Then she turned to Patricia. Please prepare Mr. Sutter's separation paperwork. Termination for cause, hostile conduct, false accusation of a federal crime, attempted coercion of building security, misuse of executive authority. Sutter's hand shot up like a man drowning. Wait, please. I've been at this company 23 years. I have contract, a severance package.
You contract?
Patricia said, without looking up from her folder, includes a conduct clause under Section 11. Any behavior that causes the company a liability, reputational damage, or regulatory risk voids severance entirely. This morning's incident, witnessed by 9 people and captured on 3 separate recording systems, satisfies every single criterion. Recording systems? Sutter's voice had shrunk to something almost childlike. I started recording the moment I walked in, Eleanor said, lifting her phone slightly. So did the ceiling cameras. So did the compliance microphones built into this table. Your entire performance this morning is already sitting on General Counsel's server, Mr. Sutter. Isaiah Boyd stood by the door, hands folded in front of him, his face giving nothing away. But his shoulders had dropped half an inch, the quiet exhale of a man who had been holding his breath for 23 years without ever quite noticing it. Sutter tried once more, his voice cracking fully now, tears standing at the corners of his eyes.
Naomi, please. I have 2 kids in college.
My wife is going through something hard right now. I wasn't myself this morning. I was stressed. Please, don't do this. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. My mother emptied bedpans for 29 years on a nurse's salary to put me through school, she finally said. She was exhausted every single day of my childhood. She was afraid, more often than she ever let me see. She never once took her bad day out on another human being. Your children will be fine, Mr. Sutter. They have resources most people never see in their entire lives. What they will not have is a father who taught them that cruelty is a currency you spend on people smaller than you. She turned away from him. Isaiah, please escort Mr. Sutter to his office. He has 15 minutes to collect personal items only. No files, no devices. His building access is already being revoked. Yes, ma'am, Isaiah said, and for the first time all morning, Bradley Sutter could not bring himself to meet another man's eyes. He stood slowly, like something much older than his 51 years, and let Isaiah walk him toward the door. At the threshold he turned back one final time. You'll regret this. I have friends across this entire city. Every word you're saying is still being recorded, Naomi said, without raising her voice even slightly. I would stop talking now. He stopped. The doors closed behind him. Naomi turned to Colleen Marsh, who was crying silently now, mascara tracking down both cheeks. For 14 minutes this morning, Ms. Marsh, you watched a senior executive call me a thief and a little girl. You laughed. You offered him your phone to call the police. You are the head of human resources at this company. Human resources does not exist to keep the peace. It exists to keep people safe. You are on administrative suspension effective immediately, pending a full external audit of every harassment complaint filed at this company in the last 5 years, and how each one was handled. Colleen gathered her things and walked out without another word, her heels clicking unevenly against the marble. Naomi finally turned to Trevor Lang and Whitney Poole. You didn't say anything, she said, but you laughed. You went along. My office, 2 o'clock. We're going to have a long conversation about the difference between staying quiet and being complicit. Neither of them spoke. Both of them nodded. Naomi pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down for the first time that morning. Now, she said, looking around at faces, still frozen somewhere between shock and shame, let's talk about the Rutledge acquisition. The story broke 2 days later. A financial wire service ran it first at 6 in the morning, and by 9, the headline had crawled across screens from Charlotte, Chicago, to Los Angeles. 23 years of smoke. The Bradley Sutter files. The byline belonged to Renee Castillos, an investigative reporter who had spent 3 years chasing rumors out of Kestrel Harbor without ever getting a single person to speak on the record. On Monday morning, her phone did not stop ringing. The piece was devastating in its precision. 3 former employees, all women of color, all bound at the time by non-disclosure agreements, came forward within 12 hours of Naomi's first public memo, which had voided every existing NDA in her first act as chief executive, accompanied by a personally signed letter mailed to every affected former employee at her own expense. The names surfaced one by one. Simone Baxter, a brilliant analyst who resigned in 2022 after Sutter told her she was too rough around the edges for their Charlotte Country Club clientele. Renata Hughes, a compliance officer who filed a formal complaint in 2021 and was quietly reassigned to a dead-end role 6 weeks later. Dominique Carter, a junior vice president passed over for promotion 3 years running while watching colleagues with half her credentials, leapfrog past her every single cycle. Each woman had heard some version of the same sentence from Colleen Marsh. That's just his personality, you're overreacting, make noise, and you'll never work in finance again. Naomi made certain none of them would ever hear that sentence from Kestrel Harbor again. The Department of Labor opened a formal investigation within a week. Investigator Marcus Feld, a soft-spoken man with a reputation for being impossible to rattle, set up a temporary office on the 38th floor and spent 3 weeks working through internal personnel records with a team of 11. What he found made national news by the end of the month. In 23 years under Bradley Sutter's leadership, the operations division had hired 290 executives. 8 were people of color. Not one had ever been promoted above the rank of director. It wasn't an accident. It was an architecture, built deliberately, one small decision at a time. The Securities and Exchange Commission opened a parallel inquiry into whether Colleen Marsh's systematic burial of harassment complaints had violated the company's disclosure of obligations to shareholders. That inquiry widened fast, and that was when investigators found the money. Bradley Sutter, it turned out, had spent over a decade quietly approving nearly $2 million in consulting invoices to a shell company registered in Delaware, owned in full by his brother-in-law. The services described on those invoices had never once been performed. Colleen had signed off on every single one without review. The paper trail was clean, damning, and unmistakably federal. The grand jury convened 4 months later. Sutter was indicted on 9 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of embezzlement, and 2 counts of obstruction of justice. Colleen was named as a co-conspirator on the financial counts. Both were arrested on the same overcast morning. Sutter outside his home in Myers Park, Colleen at her condominium near Uptown. A photograph of Sutter in handcuffs, walking from his front door to an unmarked sedan, ran on the front page of a national business daily the following week. The civil suits arrived faster than anyone expected. Simone Baxter, Renata Hughes, Dominique Carter, and a 4th former employee, Paula Reyes, who had signed an NDA back in 2019, filed a consolidated lawsuit seeking $41 million in damages. Kestrel Harbor, under Naomi's direction, did not fight it. She sat down personally with the plaintiff's attorneys and negotiated a $9 million settlement within 90 days. No new NDAs, no gag orders. Every woman received a written apology, a public acknowledgement from the company, and the option to return to her position with full seniority restored. 2 declined. Renata Hughes accepted and was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer 6 months later. Sutter's criminal trial opened the following spring. He had hired the most expensive defense team money could still legally buy him. It did not matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The ceiling camera footage, Eleanor Whitcomb's phone recording, the compliance microphone archives, 5 years of buried HR complaints, and a decade of fraudulent invoices with his signature on every one. Under cross-examination, his composure finally broke entirely. Asked directly, under oath, whether he had believed Naomi Sinclair was qualified to sit in that boardroom the morning they met, he said, "On the record, I didn't think a woman who looked like her belonged in that room. That was my honest opinion, and I'm entitled to have one." His own attorneys put their heads in their hands. Naomi was called as a witness, not for the harassment claims, which had already been settled in civil court, but to authenticate the internal audit she had commissioned as chief executive. She wore a charcoal suit and carried the same notebook, the leather worn soft at the corners now, and she answered every question in the same level voice she had used that October morning in conference room 38B. The defense attorney tried once, hard, to rattle her. "Isn't it true, Miss Sinclair, that you took over this company and immediately went after my client out of personal animus?" Naomi looked him directly in the eye. "Sir, Mr. Sutter's behavior, the morning we met, was not the cause of his investigation. It was the reason I knew exactly where to look." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Bradley Sutter was convicted on all 14 counts. Judge Elaine Rourke, a federal appointee known for precision rather than mercy, sentenced him to 84 months in federal prison, $2.9 million in restitution, and a lifetime ban from ever serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company in the United States. Colleen Marsh accepted a plea agreement 3 weeks before trial, 30 months in federal prison, $700,000 in restitution, and a permanent bar from the human resources profession. The story became a genuine national conversation. A national news magazine aired a segment titled "The Morning That Changed a Fortune 500 Company." A short clip of Naomi saying, "I'd suggest you sit down," was watched more than 110 million times before anyone stopped counting. Two business schools added the incident to their ethics curricula within the year. Naomi published a personal essay titled "On Being Underestimated," and 18 months after that October morning, Kestrel Harbor Financial Group had grown its market capitalization from $51 billion to $74 billion. The building had not changed. The floors, the glass, the view down Tryon Street, none of it had changed. but everyone who worked inside it could feel, in some quiet and undeniable way, that the air itself was different now. 2 years later, Naomi Sinclair stood behind a wooden podium on the campus of Hampton University in Virginia. The May sun warm against her shoulders, 400 graduating seniors seated in black robes in front of her, gold tassels stirring in the breeze off the water. Behind them, families filled the bleachers. Mothers in wide-brimmed hats, fathers in their goods, grandmothers clutching folded programs to their chests like something precious. Naomi was 31 now, chief executive of a Fortune 500 company, the youngest person and the first black woman ever to hold that title at Kestrel Harbor. Her speech was short. She talked about her mother, retired now, living in a small house outside Charlotte that Naomi had bought her with the first bonus she'd ever earned. She talked about Walter Kessler, the man who had believed in an 11-year-old girl with a taped-up library card long before anyone else thought to. She talked about the morning, 2 years earlier, when a man with far more power than he deserved had tried, in front of 9 witnesses, to decide who she was and what she was allowed to say. Then she looked out over the rows of graduates. "There will be a Bradley Sutter in your life," she told them. "I promise you that much. He won't always look the same. Sometimes he'll be a boss, sometimes a landlord, sometimes a stranger on a plane who thinks your seat belongs to him. Sometimes he'll be perfectly polite to your face and cruel the moment you leave the room." She paused. The breeze moved her tassel. Nobody in that crowd breathed. "What I want you to remember," she said, "is that you do not have to raise your voice to silence him. You do not have to match his cruelty with your own. You only have to know exactly who you are, at the precise moment he is trying hardest to convince you otherwise." The applause started slowly, then rose, 400 graduates on their feet, their families rising behind them in a single unbroken wave. Naomi smiled, stepped back from the podium, and took her seat. That evening she flew back into Charlotte and rode the elevator up to the 40th floor. The lights were off across most of the executive suite, except for the glow spilling from the corner office. She sat down at the desk that had once been Walter's and opened the top drawer. Inside sat a leather notebook, the same one, 2 years of quiet dust settled along its spine. Beside it, in a small velvet pouch, was a folded letter in Walter Kessler's careful, shaking handwriting. She had read it more times than she could count. She read it once more. "The world will underestimate you 1,000 times, Jasmine."
No.
It read Naomi, and she smiled at her own small slip, tired and warm at once. "Let it. And then, when the moment finally comes, do not rage. Do not break. Simply stand. And the world will finally recognize what it always refused to see." She folded the letter, closed the drawer, and called her mother. Outside her office door, the new nameplate caught the last of the overhead light. Naomi Sinclair, Chief Executive Officer. Down the hallway, Isaiah Boyd, now Director of Building Operations, a promotion Naomi had personally signed off on in her very first week, tipped his cap to her as he passed on his final round of the evening. Neither of them needed to say a word. Neither of them did. The truth is, most mornings don't end with a chairman walking through the door. Most mornings don't end with a viral clip or a federal indictment. Most mornings, the Bradley Sutters of the world keep winning quietly, because nobody in the room says a single word. That's exactly why we have to keep watching. That's exactly why we have to keep speaking, even when it costs us something to do it. That's why, when we find ourselves standing in that boardroom, or that classroom, or that waiting room, and we hear the laugh start to build around us, we have to be the one person who refuses to laugh along. The real power in this story was never the title, and it was never the badge. It was Eleanor Whitcomb pressing record without being asked. It was Isaiah Boyd saying no, quietly and meaning it completely. It was every person in that room who finally stopped staying silent. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want you to answer it in the comments. Have you ever watched someone get dismissed, humiliated, or underestimated and stayed quiet? Or did you stand up when it counted?
Tell me your story.
I read every single one. If this story reached something in you, hit the like button so it can find someone else who needs to hear it today. Share it with the person in your life who's forgotten they were never invisible. And leave a comment. Have you ever stood in that boardroom? And if you had, which side of the silence would you have been on? I'll be reading.